Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, Adrian Danila, and today I have one of my favorite co-hosts, Lori Agudo, with me. Welcome to the show, Lori.
Thank you for having me again, Adrian. I'm enjoying this. This is round 3 for us, so let's do it.
And I want to introduce today's guest, Dan Beveridge. Dan leads Initiative 2420 that we're going to talk about it at length. He's the principal out there. Every year, he's doing a research, and he publishes a white paper that pretty much is the state of the union for the apartment industry. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks. Thank you for having me again.
Dan, walk us a little bit through the genesis of 2420. How did this all started and how it evolved, and let's bring it to 2024.
Yeah, so 20 for 20 has been around for 6 years. So it started in, the first issue came out at the beginning of 2019. So we, and really the initial version of it was Donald Davidoff and I were going to Optech, and we just had this idea that, most of the people that we want to speak to there are being pitched technology all week. So rather than pitching technology, why don't we ask questions, and we can maybe write a paper based on what people tell us. People tell us what's on their mind and what they're working on. Maybe we can write a paper of some sort out of it. And once we got into doing quite a few of the interviews, we just thought, this is kind of interesting, this stuff. We're just very curious about the insights that we got, and so we published the paper. Paper had a way bigger response than we expected it to, and so it kind of grew from there. And we decided it was an annual thing that we were going to do. So yeah, each year now I interview 20 people, 10 COOs and 10 heads of technology. They go through the same interview script, and it gives us a sort of nice little temperature check on what people have been working on and what they think the year ahead holds.
So in reviewing the report, first of all, thank you for being a guest today. I'm always interested in insight, and I love the fact that you compile this data. As someone who's been in the industry for many years, even from a training and development perspective, it helps us to know what the trends are and what the pain points in the field are. We're kind of the catch-all for our companies, right? And so my next question is, can you discuss the regional variations in market conditions that are affecting revenue growth, specifically in different parts of the country, and how are companies adapting strategies accordingly? I know, for example, I'm in the state of Florida. What I'm hearing right now is that actually even in our greater Orlando area, which happens to be one of the hottest rental markets, typically things are starting to cool a little bit, but that's not necessarily in the same in other regions. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, there are basically 3 types of market in the US at the moment. There's the sort of low development, like few new apartments being delivered, and strong demand, which is what you've got in places like New York and DC. The amount of new apartments that have been added is sort of below the level of growth in the population. So that means you've still got really unaffordable rents in those markets. You've got the markets like the California markets, where you've also got relatively little new apartment inventory coming to market, but people are still not moving back to the cities. That still haven't really recovered from the pandemic. So you've got sort of stagnant conditions in a lot of markets, particularly on the West Coast. And then you've got this massive swathe of markets where there's just this unprecedented level of new supply coming to the market. You look at markets like, I think Austin, it's about, the apartments arriving this year are going to be something like 25% of the overall apartment stock of the city. So in markets like that, you have an absorption problem, right? It's going to take more than a year to absorb so much new inventory, and presumably there's more to come like after that. So depending on which kind of market you're in, you've got some very different priorities. So if you're in a market that's facing oversupply, all of your problems are to do with revenue, right? You can't grow revenue because it's harder to get people to renew. It's you face much stiffer competition for every new lease that you're trying to close. And revenue is the biggest preoccupation across the market, and it's mostly because there are so many markets that have those conditions right now.
This is definitely a concern with everybody in operations that I talk to, not being able to grow rents like we used to historically, right, within the past 3-5 years, and I think even beyond that. If we can really grow the traditional revenue, what are some things that your interviewees are focusing on to make the, to keep the business run? First of all, there's also like floating interest rates out there. A lot of investment groups have purchased properties with floating interest rates, and now their monthly payments are double and triple. So I know that hurts a lot. Even at 95% occupied, like some of them can't even make the monthly payments. And then the whole condition that you just described, markets where they overbuild. And what do we do now? So what are some strategies that they're deploying to make up for those, to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got floating rate debt at this point, it's all about surviving through to 25, I think, and you hear that a lot. On the revenue side, I mean, it's a combination of trying to, when you have real pressure on revenue like you do, one of the biggest priorities is always closing the back door, like trying to stop people from, trying to make people renew. Again, if you kind of think about the pressure you're under from the perspective of renewals, like if you've got a resident whose lease is up for renewal, they're really frequently being offered brand new product at the same price somewhere else, or perhaps even less, because if these new properties are leasing up at the moment, they're usually having to be pretty aggressive with pricing. So it's really tough. Like to the extent that you ever get to control who renews, it's harder than it is usually. So people are trying to be more analytical about how they approach renewals, like how they set renewal prices, for example. And renewals is a very multifarious thing, right? You'll know from the perspective of maintenance, that's probably the biggest single service factor that most people don't move for any reason that you had any control over, but that subset of people that do are probably more influenced by how you dealt with maintenance than anything else during their time there. So there's, you sort of take your pick of what can I do to make the renewal problem break more favorably for me. You also have a sort of renewed interest in ancillary revenue now. So, for example, well, if we'd have been talking about this 2 days ago, before the White House decided to get involved in bulk internet charges, the managed Wi-Fi was really popular amongst people who had rolled managed Wi-Fi out at any of their properties. They were generally looking to do it at more, because if you sort of flip the economics of Wi-Fi so that it's now an ancillary revenue stream for your property, that contributes a non-trivial amount of revenue to the ledger as well. So things like that, where the community can basically take a bigger piece of what traditionally goes to an external vendor. So captive insurance, like insurance policies, is another thing that people can potentially in-house if they're buying it from a third-party vendor at the moment. Basically, any opportunity that you have to take something that that your residents want and and take more of the margin in-house is a good way to mitigate against the pressure on rent.
Actually, Adrian, I want to stay with the same topic for a second, because we're talking about renewals and closing that back door and how critical that is. I kind of see it from a vantage point of what are we doing to ensure that they renew besides pricing. So, for example, and we're going to, one of the topics I know we're going to touch upon today is going to be centralization and kind of not having that site level personnel right there accessible to residents at all times because they're in a centralization office. What about relationship building to maintain that, to build that relationship from the moment the resident moves in to where it becomes naturally they're going to stay because the relationship is there, and that's also important to them. And on the flip side, I know this is something Adrian talks about a great deal, and we're talking about, yeah, maintenance is a reason that people decide to leave. The maintenance of the property, the maintenance of their apartment home, training and developing maintenance employees for them to provide the level of service that will also keep people and close that back door. What are your viewpoints on those two and how it relates to closing that back door?
So it's quite difficult to say. Like, again, the thing I keep coming back to with renewals is number one, you only get to influence a small number of them. So people generally overstate their ability to get people to renew. And number two, that influence, there are many different things that contribute to it. So relationship building is a really good idea. Like if I feel like I have more of a bond to a property, I'm likelier to stay there. We do have really high turnover though as well. So how many eggs you want to put in that basket, given that your average tenure is what, like less than a year or something at a property? That's logically the lever makes sense, but in terms of execution, it's difficult because you know, if the person you have a relationship with leaves, then you've completely lost that benefit. So one of the things that I think is interesting, actually, let me just flag this thing, because we'll probably come back to it. But one of the things that I think was very interesting from this year's interviews was that when people talk about how they're using AI, like they have AI applications that do various customer-facing things. The problem that relatively few people, in fact, I don't think anybody that I spoke to is really thinking about, which is what I think potentially the biggest opportunity with these customer-facing AIs, is this idea of using it to manage the life cycle. So if you know, people do collections using AIs. So there's an AI that, or there are multiple like different AIs that specifically just do late rent payments. They basically nag people to pay their rent once they're if they haven't paid on time. That's a good use case for conversational AI. It would be a much better use case for an AI that knows every single service request the person has ever lodged, that has conversed with that person from the very first time they showed up as a prospect all the way through to to today. So yeah, just kind of big picture thing to that problem that I talked about with staff turnover. The opportunity is that you start to think about AI as something that works across the life cycle of a resident. It provides a resident with the sort of immediacy that they want in getting their problems resolved, and it sort of transcends that problem that we've got, that people keep leaving during we have staff turnover. So that's one. One sort of longer term solution that I think is going to get more and more popular over the next year. Because if I have this sort of relationship, like this digital relationship with an AI, there are companies already out there who are getting very good at measuring sentiment. So again, if there's now data that tells you whether my interactions with the property are positive or negative, or whether they were resolved or not, that for me seems like a far better solution to the relationship building question that you were talking about, because it gets you past that issue of we're just a high staff turnover business. So that's one thing. That's my view on relationship building. I think it's a really important characteristic to train into people. I'm skeptical as to how it is in terms of changing the revenue performance of a property. The other thing with renewals, because you mentioned the sort of central aspect of it, when people are when companies are centralizing renewals, and they're essentially using it viewing it as an admin function rather than as a sales function, and I think that's quite an important distinction to draw, because if you think about we tend to think about renewals from the perspective of, I want Laurie to renew. What do I have to say to Laurie to get Laurie to renew, right? Like I'm really invested in Laurie not leaving the community. Do you know what I mean? We tend to frame it from that perspective. And I don't think that's the right way to think about renewals. Like, because most of the time people are going to move out or they're going to stay, and it's not really to do with anything that you did. The smarter way to approach it is to think about it as, I want people to make a decision as quickly as possible. Like, it's better that you make a fast decision, even if that means you're going to move out. At least that means I've now got a decent chunk of time to go find another resident for that apartment. The more you're invested in, I want Laurie to stay, the more you're likely to let things slide, like, oh, well, I'll let you know next week, kind of thing. And that's ultimately worse than you really trying to get somebody to stay, because most of the time, what you do is not material in getting people to stay in your community. So you're just better off knowing as early as possible so that you can manage your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and you know what? I love the vantage point of, you're right. When it comes to, I think that's a really important message that you share. When it comes to what I heard and what you just said is, relationship building should be done digitally. Like, use AI in the best possible manner to, temperature check your residents and know those pain points throughout their residency, and collecting that data and using that to either close that back door, or, like you said, if they'll give you ample notice, you'll be able to lease the unit to somebody else. And so you have minimal vacancy loss because you're able to do that. We also live in an instant gratification society. People just want to do something, make a decision, do an act, and they want it to be immediate. That's not even, I think, a generational thing. I just think that's the way we are wired now. So that makes perfect sense. Adrian?
Dom, you did mention, rightfully so, maintenance and the impact of maintenance services on renewals, on closing that back door. I'm curious, is maintenance coming up in a conversations that you have with these executives? What's the extent of it, and what's the sentiment? Like, what is your feeling about their vision and their focus on maintenance, and how does that translate into action plans?
Well, maintenance mostly came up in the context of centralization. So just generally, I think last year was the first year we started trying to dive deep into the functions that people are centralizing. So we split leasing and admin functions and maintenance. They're the three main buckets of property management activity. Maintenance is interesting because it's harder than either of the other two things to centralize. Right. So if you think about, the easiest is, I mean, not that any of them is easy, but the easiest set of tasks to take off site are admin, like the activities that we tend to associate with the assistant property manager. There's no reason why you need to do accounting or collections or deposit handling, or there's no reason to do any of that stuff at property. That's just the way that we've always organized it. So, you have these quite high friction, relatively low value add tasks that really lend themselves to being done in a more central location. Leasing, you can automate leasing by making more of it self-serve, right? So as a prospect, I can go tour myself. I can research the property. I don't need a leasing agent to make decisions. But it seems to me, you still need some capacity to meet people in person and tour them. And so I'm skeptical that you're going to go to whereas with admin, I think that work is all coming off site. I think leasing, there's still going to be some component of it that you have to do at property. So leasing, you've got constraints on what you can change about how you operate. You have big constraints because at the end of the day, you can't automate away most maintenance tasks. Like, somebody ultimately has to fix the fridge or the HVAC or whatever it is. Until they make robots that can come do all of that for us, you need to have a fully staffed maintenance function. One of the, I guess one of the things that occurred to me this year that's really different with maintenance compared to the others is that to the extent that people are trying to centralize maintenance functions, and when we talk about centralization, what we usually mean is instead of having maintenance report to community management, we have a cluster of properties where there's a regional head of maintenance and all the maintenance people report into them. Like that's usually what we mean when we say we say centralization in maintenance. What strikes me is nobody's doing that to break the 1-to-100 staffing ratio, right? So if you're taking leasing or admin offsite, it's usually one of the main reasons why you're doing it is usually because I'm trying to change my staffing model. Instead of having 1 per 100 units, I want to have some number. I want to have a larger number of units per staff member. So maybe I'm going from 3 to 2 staff members at my property. That's a big driver of why you do that. That's not the driver of why people are trying to centralize maintenance. The money isn't in having fewer FTEs per property. The money in centralizing maintenance is in spending less money that you don't have to, right? So, example in the white paper, just one company had started to, he clustered some properties, and they'd employed an appliance repair specialist, right? So there's one person in that cluster of properties who just fixes appliances. And what he said was like, ever since they employed that person, he's never signed a single invoice for an external repair person to come to a community. Now those, and I mean, Adrian, you've been doing maintenance for a long time. Like you can imagine, I mean, you sort of make your money $500 at a time with these things, but those things really, really stack up. There are many things that you call external trades to come and fix for you. The money in sort of centralizing maintenance is in eliminating as much of that spend as you can and just having your own people solve those problems. So that's that's the for me, that's what the driver is, and that seems to be more where the industry is going. But there are other interesting things as well. I mean, there is a bigger self-serve component that you can bring in. There are some repairs that people like to fix, are happy to fix themselves, right? So if I order the part off Amazon and send it to you, call me back and I can talk you through how to fix the cistern on your toilet or something. That also that outsources some activities to the resident, and there are lots of residents who prefer that to having somebody sitting around waiting for somebody to come fix some small problem in their apartment. So those things, they reduce the amount of work you have to do. I don't think they reduce it in terms of like we get to change our staffing model by virtue of having that. But in a function where you struggle to be fully staffed, having these, taking some work off the place of maintenance, and in particular, getting rid of some out of hours service. Right, if I can call a 24-hour help desk and agree a resolution on a ticket, if that means that a maintenance tech doesn't have to show up in the middle of the night to a unit, that's a huge win for the community. So there's lots of things like that that remove friction from the job, but those seem to me to be the main things that people are working on.
So and essentially working smarter, not harder, and leaning again once on that technology footprint. Adrian?
Yeah. Just wanted to ask a follow-up question here, Dom. Did procurement come up in a conversation at all this year? Because you mentioned like not spending the money where you don't have to spend, like, or don't be careless about how you spend the money. And I've seen historically many companies that are leaving millions of dollars on the table by not doing procurement right the way they do. They just pick a vendor and they say we're gonna get the best deal, and the reality is like the complete opposite, to where you get the best deal by bringing in at least 2 or 3 vendors and allow them to compete. Even the HD Supplies and the Lowe's of the world, when you're talking about MRO stuff or renovations. Was this part of questionnaire, or did it come up in a conversation at all? Any interesting takes on procurement this year?
Yeah, nobody talked about it at all this year, which is interesting, because there are I mean, I know there's at least one company that I can think of that's bringing a procurement solution, or I guess a sourcing and procurement solution to multifamily. That's explicitly so. I mean, you've got two parts to it, right? I think what you just described, I would describe as sourcing, right? It's the thing where you go find vendors and you get them to bid on stuff and you decide who your suppliers are. That's part one. And then you've got procurement, which is how do I buy from them? And both of them are problems, right? Both of them are areas where people waste money. Like in most companies, like not in multifamily, but in most industries, you have sourcing and procurement functions. So when you appoint a new supplier, you have a process that you go through. You put out RFIs. You do 3 RFPs. You have people bid off against one another, and that's how you come up with the people who are going to supply you with stuff. Then you've got to make people comply with whatever procurement policy you have in place. So don't go to the Home Depot to buy this. You have to buy this item through this portal from this supplier. And again, that's something that's fairly loose in multifamily. There are obviously solutions that are designed to help with that. But you can tell that people waste money by just buying stuff by not following the policy, or by not having a policy in the first place. But yeah, nobody talked about that. So in an environment where maybe people more and more have senior maintenance people running maintenance, one of the things that one of the opportunities that they might capitalize on is bringing that stuff under control.
Hopefully you would introduce a question about procurement next year. I would really love to get some feedback, very high level, executive level.
Yeah, well, so who do you think, just in your experience, who's in charge of that in a multifamily organization?
This is so loose, right? So the largest companies, the gray stars of the world, they have entire departments. They're managing that. I just think the philosophy of taking a sales pitch and making that your procurement strategy, it's absolutely wrong, because they're being sold on, we're buying in tiers. Once I hit $1 million in purchases, I'm gonna get an extra discount point. And once I hit 2 million, they give me another discount point. So therefore, I gotta keep everything in one basket. Reality is that I've done studies on my own, and actually those companies will give you the same deals, and they're happy to compete over your business if you just ask 2 of them to compete over the business. And then when you look at the entire catalogs worth of like parts and materials, some prices, 60-70% difference between the 2 suppliers that they're competing. So imagine that you're going to be stuck with one that's going to make up their own pricing, right? Nobody typically in a smaller companies, when I'm talking about smaller, it's not like 2,000 units. I'm talking about everything that's probably like below 20,000. You don't have a person to follow up to make sure that, are we really following the terms of the contract? Are we really getting the discounts that we're being told that we're getting? Basically, you just sign a contract, which takes forever to sign. And then ultimately, everybody's happy we sign a deal, but nobody's really following up to say, okay, are we really getting what we were told we're getting? And I'm not here suspecting that the vendor partners are trying to take advantage of a situation. I just think that there's no system to check, right? Trust, but verify. Just verify that we're actually getting the deal that we signed for, right? So that's one of the aspects, right? Just going exclusively with a single vendor. Not to say that there's no single vendor, especially in today's environment, that could cater to all of your needs. When you're a large company, they're always going to have a shortage of staff. They're always going to have stuff on a back order. So how does that affect your residents? Is it really worth it? So those are some of the challenges. But for the most part, I'm not seeing strategy, right? And what is being, I guess, called a strategy, it's a bureaucratic environment where someone says, we looked at the 2 offers and we're going to pick one of them, which again, to me, that's like is detrimental for you as a customer. Going with one
I want to
supplier.
add to that, Dom, to kind of answer your question about who would you incorporate when you're looking at next year's survey of your 20 operators, or give or take. When you're looking at, so the organization I work for, I'm with Royal American Management, and we do have a dedicated group of people that actually do trust but verify, and it's our contracting department. The same group, the same head of contracting that facilitated the actual contract. there's a team of people in place that do, again, verify that continuously throughout the year that we're getting as promised. And then there's that regular level of service and that open line of communication between us and said supplier. If you're looking at who you're going to ask, in our organization, our vice president of maintenance is the one who's involved in all of that decision making and data and analysis. So you're really looking at who's your head of facilities within each organization and the team of people they work with. That's maybe something you want to consider incorporating if that's a question you're looking to ask the next time you compile this data. So we're going to stay with Adrian. I do want to kind of stay with, I know, because it's such a hot topic, I want to stick with
absolutely
AI in multifamily. And because, of course, it does scare, the unknown does scare some. And there's still quite a bit of unknown because I feel like it's still relatively new to us and how we use it, right? And it's when we're looking at AI and we're looking at what, site teams, whether it's centralization or whether it's, teams that are still, at the site level, there's a lot of resistance to tech, just like in general. You hear a lot of just because they don't understand it. How do you see the role of AI evolving in multifamily operations, specifically areas like revenue management, business intelligence, fraud prevention? Because that's another thing that's proliferated over the years in our industry is we're dealing with fraud when it comes to things like rental applications. So what's your take on how do we see AI evolving in our industry?
Well, so I'll give you a general answer, and then we can talk about a couple of the specific things that you just mentioned. So from the thing I was interested in this year was not so much what specific things are people using it for. It's much more, I was more interested in knowing how do you think about AI? Because we had, this was the first year that OpenAI has been available, right? So if you went to any conference in the first half of 2023, the level of hype behind generative AI was just out of control. It was, you would have thought by NAA last year, you would have thought that by the end of the year, robots are going to be doing everything. It's true,
especially on the trade show floor.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then we got that for me was one of the most interesting things about Optech. You're just walking around the conference, listening to the sessions and everything. And you're like, nobody's talking about this stuff anymore. Like this was this tidal wave of, there were all these sort of gurus being rolled out at conferences to tell us all this stuff. And yeah, by the time Optech came around, it had totally sort of died down. That's not to say this isn't this incredibly transformative technology. It's just like you really, really need to think about what problems it's going to solve and how it's going to solve them. Generally, the 20 people that I spoke to, they're mostly focused on stuff that is customer facing, and anything that's customer facing, you buy from a third party application provider who specializes in that. So nobody's thinking about things like how do we use, how do we build custom stuff that uses OpenAI to do anything that's customer facing in our organization. The people that were thinking about things like OpenAI were thinking about it in terms of back office functions, like what can we automate around around accounting, around how we run our IT help desk, around it was all that kind of problem that people were sort of saying, you've now got this incredibly powerful resource that makes chat available to sort of whatever custom use you want to put it to. So rather than saying I have to wait for a vendor to come and solve this specific problem and then decide whether I want to roll out this vendor's application, you get companies saying that, like, okay, well, we can write a little custom interface that uses OpenAI to resolve help desk issues, something like that. You have so you have people, the most sophisticated people out of the 20 that I spoke to were working on problems like that, but they're always non-customer facing. The customer facing stuff, I mean, I think we talked earlier about the biggest opportunity that I see is that people are looking at these individual applications of AI that sort of take away bits of friction from how they run their operations. So collections is a great example. Nobody likes chasing people to pay rent. So let's get an AI to have that conversation. It'll do it in a much more structured and consistent way. It will do it through text, which is a much less confrontational way of nagging people to pay their rent than knocking their door or calling them or any of that stuff. So great use case there. We do lead nurturing. We chat to prospects to nurture them through to booking a tour. Increasingly you're seeing people process things like service requests. There's companies that do more and more of that. As I said earlier, the opportunity is to sort of stop thinking about it in this one app at a time kind of way, and sort of think about, all right, well, what should AI be doing to contribute to the overall customer experience? I think that gives you quite a different answer. To talk to a couple of the things that you mentioned, your revenue management and business intelligence, I remain fairly skeptical about the use of AI in those scenarios. Right? It's tempting to think that you can let AI loose on your data and it will figure things out differently from how conventional data analysis techniques would. I'm not sure we've seen that much evidence of that yet. Like, the problem we have in multifamily is that you just don't have that big of a volume of data. Like, because we sell our product 12 months at a time, you have a very small number of leases that are the thing you need to power a function like revenue management. If I only turn over each unit once a year, that means I've got, in a 300 unit property, I've got about 300 data points to play with. Well, that's not a problem that has the kind of dimensions to it where you get to really leverage AI. You want AI to be dealing with masses of data, like and going looking for sources of correlation that a human wouldn't normally think of looking for. So the idea that there's this sort of AI magic wand that we can wave over things like revenue management and BI that's going to be different from what we already have. I don't think we've seen the evidence of that yet. And then the final thing was fraud, where already there's some very cool applications of AI that are being applied to fraud. In fact, it was one of the biggest areas of its biggest surprise to me in this year's interviews is just how big of a deal fraud is right now, how much of an arms race it is, particularly in terms of technology. So if I think about what I would view to be a really, really cool use of AI is you have companies that are using AI to analyze like thousands and thousands of documents that people submit when they're applying for leases, and basically having AI figure out these minute details in the code behind documents that tell you whether or not that document is likely to be genuine or fraudulent. And the cues that it picks up are very, very small. It would be very hard to spot them with the naked eye. But again, because you're taking thousands of documents and you know whether they turned out to be fake or not, the AI is now much more able to spot stuff that the bad guys are doing to defraud renters.
Because they're getting very sophisticated in their tactics in recent years. And I think, unfortunately, I feel like this proliferated during the pandemic. And now this is our post-pandemic reality that people have gotten very creative on how they can mimic somebody else's identity and falsify documents. And they're using it in a multitude of ways. And rental housing, of course, is going to be one of those ways because, let's face it, housing is an essential need. So interesting perspective on all of that. Adrian.
I want to stay with technology a little bit. And I want to ask you to share some insights into how are the property management organizations approaching acquisition of new technology, particularly considering the changes observed in the industry over the past year. And, the vetting process, maybe you have some insights from them on how do they vet?
Well, yeah, I was very interested in this because a year ago people were saying, because they knew that the property trading environment was going to slow down because of the interest rate environment that we're in. People were thinking about how do I optimize NOI, because we're going to have to do it for longer periods than we normally would, because we're not going to sell the property for the foreseeable future. So 2023 was going to be a year where we look to drive various efficiencies, and people looking forward to that year, when I asked them a year ago, were saying that this will be a year where we try and eliminate waste from the technology stack, and we get more systematic about how we evaluate technology. At the same time, you have companies out there who are focused on on procurement. So you've got new products and services coming to market that help people to evaluate and manage vendors, for example. So given there was just generally a lot of chatter during 2023, I was mostly just curious to know if anything had changed. And for the most part, nothing really did. When people had changed anything about the way they evaluate technology, it was mostly that we're focusing on stuff that has a material payback this calendar year. Like this year, we're not going to do any projects that are long-term or strategic in their nature. There has to be some offset that we get to take to the bank. And if we don't get that, we're probably just not going to do any projects like that for the foreseeable future. The sort of voiceover that people gave on how they evaluate technology sort of told me that I'd asked the wrong question. I'd framed it from the perspective of how people evaluate technology, which is a bit of a vendor-centric viewpoint, right? Like if you look at it from a vendor's perspective, they sort of see this always as this beauty contest where, Adrian is evaluating all of the widgets out there in the market side by side, and he wants to pick the best widget, and the best widget at the best price gets all of Adrian's business. That tends to be the way that vendors see this problem. When you talk to operators, you realize that occasionally happens, but that's not usually the way that people are evaluating technology. Like the two different use cases are, well, first of all, what people tell you is we're a real estate business, and so the technology that's in my technology stack was not always technology that I chose. Some stuff comes to us by way of partners or by way of properties that we purchased or are now running. So the more common problem that people are dealing with is we'd like to try and rationalize down to one vendor per category. People are more often doing that than the beauty contest scenario. So if you think about that in terms of evaluation, we're talking about technologies that they're already familiar with, they're already using. They just want to get rid of vendors to the extent that they can. When they're buying new technology, the fascinating thing was that again, it's seldom the case that you're doing the side-by-side analysis. It's a much more likely scenario is that a head of operations is trying to think about what they can do to improve how their operation works based on the opportunities that are out there in the market this year. So renewals again is a really good example of this. Super high priority, many different things that you can do to be better at it. Where do you place your bets? You can't do everything. Are you going to focus on the process of renewals? Are you going to focus on getting better at analytics that will make you better at deciding what you're going to offer people? Are you going to focus on service, on maintenance? There's many different things that you can do to address that. So the scenario where new technology comes along is typically where somebody's deciding, okay, well, I think this is what I want to prioritize this year, and occasionally that overlaps with a piece of new technology that you're aware of, and that tends to be the way that people buy new technology. It's not right next week, let's get all the vendors of X in and evaluate them. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that seems to me to be much more representative of the way that people evaluate technology.
I do have a somewhat follow-up question to that. Sticking with AI technologies, what steps do you feel our industry, or based on your conversations What steps is the industry taking to prepare for the evolving scope and capabilities of AI? Like, what strategies do we have in place? Obviously, this is still relatively new. It's going to evolve over time. Like, what steps, the operators that you spoke to, what steps did that come up in conversation? Like, how do they plan to keep up with, besides deciding what technology to use, just overall, like, how do you anticipate this AI strategy evolving in response to industry trends that we know change? They fluctuate all the time.
So the short answer is I don't think people are thinking about that much at all right now. You have this sort of wave of automation that's coming. Like, we don't quite know how or how quickly, but there's absolutely no doubt that it's coming. Most people are, they're thinking about AI exactly the same way as they think about any other technology. So I need a widget that does this. Let's buy that and plug it into our technology stack. So they're not thinking about it any more strategically than that. Those that are, and there are not that many of them, like I said, they're typically thinking about things like, right, what high friction, low value tasks can we automate out of our business? I think once you start to experiment with that, you probably start to move quite quickly. Like the most sophisticated people that I spoke to, if they've done one thing, they suddenly become really bullish about everything else. I mean, I think the way that the more sophisticated people, in terms of how they think about AI, the way they're thinking about adopting AI looks similar to me to the way that people have been adopting centralization, like particularly admin centralization. A couple of years ago, like, just all the talk was about leasing. It was leasing centralization. It was we're going to get rid of leasing agents. We're going to have everything self-serve, automation, blah 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 blah. Last year, when you really drilled down into the details and made people tell you what they've done, you realize very few people have actually centralized leasing. They've rolled out centralized technology, but nothing much has changed about the way that leasing works at a property level. But admin, that was, people were very actively moving that offsite, and that's accelerated year over year. I think what that tells us is that when people actually start to, when the rubber hits the road, when people really try to change stuff, they gravitate towards what are the most high friction, low value tasks that we do. Let's figure out how to get them off property first. I think you'll find the same, because if you think about it, you can make leasing largely self-serve, but there's still this risk associated with changing the way that you lease apartments, right? If we said we're not going to have leasing agents anymore, that's quite a risky play, right? To make, even like UDR, who are probably the people that the poster child of self-serve leasing in the industry, they do lease ups with leasing agents, right? Because when you really need to make sure that you're going to be successful in leasing, you still need some capacity to have people tour prospects, and it moves the needle. Whereas none of those things really applies to maintenance. Doesn't make a difference to a resident whether the month-end accounts were done on property or whether they were done in the shared services center, right? So people gravitate towards moving those offsite because it removes friction, it's low risk, and it's better to do it that way. I think what you're going to find with AI is that as more and more admin stuff gets centralized, it will then get automated as well. So you're going to find there's a natural progression. You centralize it and then you automate it, and I think you're going to find that applies to most sort of high friction, repetitive tasks that you have to do, but that don't necessarily add any value to your customers.
We're again getting back to that concept of working smarter, not harder. But if we look at some of the administrative tasks, those mundane tasks, if you will, because I did come from the site level. That's where I started in this industry. And ironically, Dom, UDR was one of my former employers. I was with them some years ago, and they were always known for that leading with like that technology footprint years before everybody else did. They were the first ones to have their own app, for example. So, but again, while still keeping that human element, I'm going to take a little bit of a kind of twist on this conversation. We're looking at centralization specifically. We're talking about taking certain tasks, which would essentially somewhat eliminate certain types of positions. We'll stick with, for example, an assistant community manager who does a great deal of those tasks, so to speak. When it comes to career progression, if we're moving to a centralization, how do you identify talent? How do you fill future needs? Is that even on the radar of those that you spoke to? Or is it a thought process of theirs? Is how do you promote from within? How do you promote career progression within the organization? How do you fill those future higher level positions while being able to promote from within? How do you identify talent if you just have a centralized office and then many of those administrative tasks that would show you somebody's ability to manage, so to speak, and to be effective in, even if it's something as mundane as data entry or their ability to manage an emergency on property? How do you identify that when you move to a centralization footprint? Like how do people feel like there's still a path forward or an upward path mobility within an organization if they're in a centralization office? Like how do you still identify talent and still show that you're investing in your employees?
Well, I mean, everyone who's done this says it improves your ability to have, you give people more career options. I mean, you have fewer jobs overall, but I mean, one of the problems with admin is like, it was just never a very good idea to do it at property in the first place, right? Most of the reason why it's even still there is that, to take an APM role off site means that you go from 3 bodies to 2 bodies, which means I've now got a coverage problem. It's nothing to do with the work at all. So there's this sort of convenience factor around having people do that work at property, but it just means that if you have 50 different properties, it means admin tasks, which should be absolutely consistent, right? It should be your objective to make these things consistent. You've got sort of 50 variations on a theme because it's a different APM did it in each property. Most businesses in most industries do stuff like that in shared services, right? You just have specialist resources, then you engineer the processes so that everything's completely consistent. And it means from a career perspective that there are people who are good at managing admin processes, and you want them managing yours. Like the idea that we should property management, we've always tried to force everyone to be a generalist, right? So to think from a career perspective, you take a strong leasing agent, and the promotion path is into a job that's mostly like accounts and administration. Like that never really made a lot of sense in the first place. So yeah, the model, if your business has you have the business model that gives you the flexibility to do this, the successful model is we start taking the activities offsite, we put them into shared services. What you tend to find is that when you start to correct errors that people make all the time at property, like you make enough money that you can support a central team doing that stuff. As soon as the processes are working really, really well, like you basically take everything that's to do with admin offsite. At that point, you can sort of start not backfilling roles when people leave. So you get to decide, well, at this property, do I need that additional person or don't I? Like, have I reduced the amount of work that they need to do enough that I don't really need that additional resource anymore? And so when you're centralizing stuff, you get to sort of promote people into more specialized roles, which is better for the career. So out of your 50 assistant property managers, maybe there's a half dozen who are really good at that kind of stuff. So those are your natural candidates to do these roles on behalf of the whole portfolio. So they're really in a job that's more suitable for their skill set and that offers them a career advancement. And yeah, everyone else, you're pushing more and more towards being customer facing, service providing, sales orientated, that kind of thing. So it's better really from a career management perspective.
Well, and the reason I wanted to ask that question is because, that has been some concern for those site level employees. So I wanted our listeners to be able to hear that this is actually a positive thing. And you just put a very positive spin and gave them that perspective that probably they needed if they were having some concern about their career trajectory. So thank you for that. It's okay.
So that, as we're getting ready to conclude our conversation today, I'd like to give you the opportunity to look ahead 2024 and beyond. What trends or developments do you foresee in centralization efforts, in technology, anything that you've been focusing on during your study? And what are some main trends that you see happening?
So I think fraud is the most active area of technology this year. I just think it's the specific problem with fraud. Laurie mentioned earlier this sort of pandemic kind of hangover effect. I think what basically happened was that when you had all these eviction moratoria, it created this huge demand for information on how to not get evicted, right? So all these influencer accounts started to crop up on social media. It's a short step from there into telling people how to file fraudulent applications. That there's a natural market for creating and selling fake documents. So there's technology on the bad guys side here. And just the nature of sort of social media means that people are targeting not just generally how to defraud landlords, it's how to defraud specific landlords in specific markets, right? So you hear that the companies who are trying to figure out how to defraud to file fraudulent applications are filing applications to figure out who has which checks. So that means you can tell people specifically, all right, well, I know which properties are not checking this stuff, so these are the ones that you should target. It's an arms race, right? It's not going to, you're not going to be able to be successful as a property manager if you're just doing this stuff manually, because it just seems to me that it's inevitable that people are just going to target you. So I think this arms race between technologies that all work in quite different ways. So it's one of these areas where property managers have to learn quite fast how these different technologies work, which ones are going to be the most effective, which ones are the best fit with your policies on how you screen applicants. That seems to me like it's going to be a very active area for the foreseeable future. And yeah, I think the penny that has to drop just on AI, the penny that has to drop in 2024, I think, is people are just going to start realizing the enormous additional benefit of thinking about AI from a life cycle perspective, rather than thinking about it from oh, here's a task that I don't like, and here's an AI that does it for me. Let's just roll that individual app out. So I think you have to think about this in terms of this can fundamentally change the way that the conversation works with your residents. It's going to make your business better. They're going to like it more. I think people have to, the light has to go on for more people about that in 2024, because there are some companies out there that are doing this really, really well already.
So I have a follow-up question to that. How do we do that? How do we get them to see the benefit of using it appropriately, to make their business model more effective, to make their processes more streamlined, to positively impact the business? How do we get people to see the light?
I mean, it's still something, if it's customer facing, it's hard enough to do that you need specialists to do it for you, right? So I would say the most interesting basis for competition between the vendors of customer facing AI solutions is how broadly they manage your resident lifecycle, customer lifecycle. I don't think that's the way that people are evaluating it right now, I think that's exactly how people should be thinking about this. So yeah, if I could put it in one sentence, I'd say stop looking for widgets. Think about how you want your interaction with customers to work.
Dom, amazing conversations. Thank you so much for sharing such a valuable insight here with us today. I hope to get you back here soon. We haven't even scratched the surface on everything that you put together this year. So maybe we could do a part 2 if you're up for it.
Sure. Always interested to have these conversations.
As always,
Tom, what incredible conversation. And thank you, Adrian, for the opportunity again to even co-host these conversations. But for me personally, I'm always, people think me being in a training and development role that, this doesn't touch what we do, but it does, because every bit of knowledge, every bit of insight that I'm able to receive, I'm able to share that with my audience. And my audience is, the managers within our organization or within our industry. So for me personally, thank you so much. I found this conversation very, very insightful. So
awesome. Thank you, guys.
Everybody, thank you so much for watching us today. This is Multifamily Chronicles, episode 101. Really, so 101 with Dom Beveridge. How does that sound? We hope to see you back here soon. Have an amazing day.
Thanks so much, everyone.